In the quiet halls of Clarence House, a small but deliberate act lit a fuse behind royal walls. A single portrait, Princess Charlotte, age 8, was quietly removed from the gallery without explanation. It wasn't replaced, it wasn't relocated, it simply vanished. At first, no one dared speak of it. In royal households, even silence can carry weight. But whispers began to spread. Why Charlotte? Why now? When word reached Kensington Palace, the response wasn't loud, but it was immediate. Prince William, calm by nature, understood what had been done. This wasn't about decor, it was about legacy. The missing portrait wasn't just a picture. It became a symbol. And Queen Camilla may have underestimated the storm she was about to face. Princess Charlotte was never meant to blend in. From her very first public appearance, just hours old, in her mother's arms on the steps of the Lindo Wing, she radiated something distinct. The world saw it. The press called it poise, but those closest to her knew it was something deeper, presence. As she grew, Charlotte became a kind of bridge between tradition and change, between her father's wounded past and the future he hoped to build. She wasn't just a royal child. She was a symbol of a monarchy trying to feel more human again. Within the palace, her spirit left an impression wherever she walked. Staff whispered about her curiosity, her wit, how she once asked a butler if wearing polished shoes all day made his feet sad, how she insisted on saying good morning to the kitchen staff, even when no one else did. She had questions about everything, especially about the people in the portraits. But it was the one of her grandmother, Diana, that held her gaze the longest. Often, Charlotte would pause in front of it, asking quietly, "Was Granny D brave?" Catherine had once told a confidant that Charlotte wanted to grow up strong, not loud, just strong like Granny D. So when Charlotte's own portrait was removed, it didn't just sting, it echoed. This was the little girl who asked the hard questions, who danced through the halls of Kensington barefoot, who once told a visiting dignitary that her room had too many rules for play. She was not simply George's sister or Louis's playmate. She was forming her own legacy, a quiet force of character, a light that didn't ask to shine but did anyway. Removing her from the gallery was not merely a design change. It was a statement, one that cut against everything her parents had worked to protect. For while George was being shaped into a future king and Louis embraced as the royal darling, Charlotte found her place in between, not through status, but through heart. And that made her absence all the more glaring. Because the truth was clear, Charlotte mattered. To the family, to the staff, to the legacy Diana left behind. And now, whether Camilla intended it or not, her quiet removal from the gallery had become a challenge. Not just to a little girl, but to the very fabric of what the royal family claimed to stand for. The instruction wasn't given in anger. It wasn't even framed as a directive. It came reportedly over tea. Camilla, Queen Consort, was walking the East Gallery with a senior aide when she paused beside the wall of family portraits. With a soft gesture toward one frame, Charlotte in her birthday dress, she stirred her Earl Grey and murmured, "That one, the girl in blue. It no longer fits the tone of the room. No fuss, no raised voice, just words wrapped in silk." But inside royal households, words like that are never innocent. Tone, after all, is code. Everyone in the room understood exactly what she meant. The staff moved swiftly. No formal paperwork, no announced changes, just two aides quietly removing the frame, wrapping it in felt, and walking it out of the gallery. Camilla had long known how to navigate palace optics. She understood the power of placement, which photos were allowed in public spaces, which faces were displayed behind closed doors, and she understood more than most how imagery shaped perception. After all, she had spent years rewriting her own. To some within the household, this wasn't surprising. There had always been whispers of her reluctance around the Wales children, of her preference for the company of her own grandchildren, of her quiet unease whenever Diana's name surfaced in conversation. Charlotte, with her confidence and growing resemblance to the late Princess of Wales, had become a visual echo of a past Camilla never fully escaped. Whether it was insecurity, control, or simply image management, no one could say for sure. But the decision had been made. And while Camilla may have thought she was adjusting a room's tone, she was, in reality, redrawing a family's boundaries. Portraits, after all, are more than decoration in the palace. They are declarations who belongs and who is convenient to forget. And this time, Camilla had chosen to forget Charlotte. Only she didn't expect anyone to notice. or care. She was wrong. For days, the disappearance of the portrait lingered like an unspoken truth in the corridors of Clarence House. No one addressed it directly. No one dared. In the palace, silence is as much a job requirement as discretion. But beneath the polished routines, polishing silver, arranging floral displays, preparing the queen consort's schedule, there was a quiet, mounting discomfort everyone had noticed, and everyone knew better than to speak. Except for Eleanor, a senior housekeeper with 20 years of royal service under her belt. Eleanor had worked under Queen Elizabeth, King Charles, and the transition that followed. She wasn't dramatic, nor disloyal. She was simply tired of seeing certain patterns repeat under different names. She had been there that morning, dusting the gallery as she always did, pausing as she always had in front of Charlotte's portrait. It was one of her favorites. "That little girl's got spark," she'd once told a colleague. But that day the wall was bare, and not long after, she saw two aides carefully carrying the wrapped frame toward storage, saying nothing. No one needed to speak, the act said it all. Eleanor didn't act impulsively, but the image of Charlotte being tucked away, as if she didn't belong, struck something in her. That child had always reminded her of Diana, curious, bright, and somehow older than her years. And now here she was, quietly removed like a misplaced object. It felt wrong. Later that afternoon, during a routine call with a colleague now based at Kensington Palace, Eleanor let it slip, not as a complaint, but as a confession. They removed her, Charlotte, the portrait's gone. There was silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. "You're serious?" Eleanor hesitated, then sighed. "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't." That call changed everything. Within hours, the message had moved through the tight-lipped corridors of Kensington, not as gossip, but as concern. From a trusted voice, one not prone to drama. Eleanor wasn't the kind to stir the pot. She'd covered for Catherine during her early morning walks. She had once shielded young George from an over-eager photographer. If she was speaking now, there was reason. The act of removing Charlotte's portrait had been quiet, but the reaction was gaining volume. For the first time, the silence had cracked. And when silence breaks inside a royal household, something always follows. Something that can't be ignored. The news reached Prince William not through headlines or official channels, but through the voice of someone who had nothing to gain by speaking. It was late evening at Kensington Palace. The day's briefings were done, the children were in bed, and the house had settled into its quiet rhythm. William was reviewing notes in his study when his private secretary entered, a folded message in hand. It wasn't typed or formal, it was handwritten, in careful aging script. The note was from Eleanor. He read it once, then again. His posture didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. "The portrait of Princess Charlotte," it began, "was removed from Clarence House at the direction of Her Majesty the Queen Consort. No official reason given. There was no accusation, no emotion in the wording, but William didn't need any." He placed the note down slowly. The silence in the room grew heavy. This wasn't about optics. It wasn't about a picture. It was about a message, one that had been sent without a word. Charlotte was not a pawn in a palace game. She was his daughter, his fire and his softness, his link to everything he had promised to protect. And someone had decided she didn't belong on the wall. He stood and walked to the mantel, where photographs of the children sat in carefully chosen frames. George with his first pony, Louis smudged with cake, Charlotte mid-laugh, her eyes shining. He adjusted her frame slightly, almost without thinking. A small act, but meaningful. William knew the palace well, knew how it operated behind the scenes, the layers of diplomacy laced into every decision, but he also knew what it meant when someone erased a woman from a wall. He had lived that story once already. He had watched his mother disappear from portraits, from rooms, from conversations, always quietly, always strategically. Not this time. He called for his private aide. "I want every decision about that portrait documented. Who requested it, when, and why?" Discreetly. There was no anger in his tone, only clarity. That night, after speaking with Catherine, who had already heard and said little, William made his decision. There would be no press statement, no public protest. But this would not be ignored. A portrait had been removed. Now something far more powerful was about to be put back. Clarence House had never been quieter. The staff sensed it before they saw him, when Prince William's car pulled into the private entrance. No escorts, no press, no aides. Word traveled quickly but silently. He was not there for a visit. He hadn't come to share pleasantries. He had come with purpose. Queen Camilla was in the white drawing room, reviewing briefing notes for an upcoming engagement. She looked up when the door opened, surprised to see William standing alone. He didn't smile. He didn't sit. He simply said, "Why was Charlotte's portrait removed?" Camilla blinked, taken off guard. The question was direct. Unsoftened, still, her voice remained calm. The space was being refreshed, she said, her tone measured, almost rehearsed. A curatorial update, nothing more. William didn't flinch. George and Louis are still hanging. A pause stretched between them. Camilla set her papers down slowly. It wasn't meant to offend. It was a matter of visual balance. "She is a child," William replied evenly, "not a design element." It wasn't the volume of his voice. It was the certainty in it. The years of silent observation, of playing the royal role with patience, now sharpened into resolve. Camilla held his gaze. For the first time in years, she felt off balance. William had always been polite, even gracious. But this was different. There was steel in him now. "It's not personal," she said. "You know how sensitive these displays can be, especially with the press watching." William stepped closer. "This wasn't about the press, this was about control, and you don't get to decide who belongs in this family." There it was, the sentence she hadn't expected, the one that struck deeper than any headline. She said nothing. William didn't wait for more. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Restore the portrait," he said, "publicly, or I will, and if I do, it won't stop there." Then he left. No raised voices, no dramatics, but the message was absolute. What had begun as a quiet act of exclusion had become a moment of reckoning. And Camilla, for all her years of navigating palace politics, now stood alone in a room where her influence no longer felt so certain. William had drawn a line, and he had done it not as a prince, but as a father. At Adelaide Cottage, the air was different, and it wasn't cold or tense. It was still, the kind of quiet that sits just below the surface, waiting to be broken. Catherine had spent the day with the children, her face composed, her tone gentle. Charlotte hadn't noticed anything unusual. Not yet. But Catherine had known since morning. A quiet phone call, a brief summary, enough to fill in the rest. She had walked the garden with Charlotte that afternoon, helping her pick flowers to press in a book, smiling, listening, shielding. That was what she always did, shield them from the weight of the world, even as it pressed against her own shoulders. By the time William returned that evening, Catherine was in the kitchen, setting down a teacup. He walked in slowly, his face unreadable but his eyes sharper than usual. "She admitted it?" Catherine asked softly. William nodded, called it a design decision. Catherine looked down. "It wasn't, though." "No," William said, "it wasn't." There was a long pause between them, the kind where everything has been said, and yet nothing at all. "She looks for herself in those halls," Catherine finally whispered. "She stares at Diana's portrait. She asks if Granny D would be proud of her." William moved closer. "She would be." Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she folded a dish towel. "It's not just about the picture, Will. It's about what they think they can do. To her, to us. Like we're pieces they can rearrange when the room feels too full." William didn't speak. Instead, he reached for her hand, held it, steady. "She won't grow up erased," he said. "Not while we're here." Catherine looked at him, tears brimming but unspilled. "Then let's make sure she knows that." That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine opened a drawer in her private sitting room. Inside were drawings Charlotte had made. Castles, flowers, a stick figure with curly hair and a crown labeled "Me." At the bottom of the stack, she found a printed copy of the portrait, the one Camilla had removed. She turned it over and wrote in neat script, "You are seen, you are loved, you are never going anywhere." Then she placed it on the mantel, where Charlotte would see it in the morning. It wasn't a public statement. It was something stronger. It was a mother's quiet promise. The portrait's return wasn't announced, no memo was issued, no headlines declared it. But inside Clarence House, the change was impossible to miss. On a gray Thursday morning, a royal art conservator arrived through a side entrance accompanied by 2 senior aides. Not interns, not casual handlers. This was not routine. This was deliberate. The portrait of Princess Charlotte was reinstalled, not in a tucked-away hallway or secondary sitting room, but on the grand staircase, the very place where guests passed on their way to state receptions. A place of prominence, of message. Same photograph, same blue dress. But this time, It hung in a gilded frame slightly larger than before. Beneath it, a discreet brass plaque had been added. Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte of Wales, daughter of legacy, light of the future. It wasn't just restoration, it was declaration. Inside the palace, staff exchanged glances, not words. They knew what this meant. This wasn't Camilla's doing. This was William's, executed with precision and subtlety, the kind passed down from a mother who had once fought battles without ever raising her voice. Sources confirmed it quietly. The reinstallation came at the direct request of the Prince of Wales, following what one advisor called an internal clarification of expectations, a phrase that, in royal language, translated to a boundary being drawn and respected. When Camilla passed by the staircase later that day, she didn't speak, but she paused longer than usual. Those present noticed her expression change. Not anger, not surprise, but stillness. She understood what had happened. The portrait was back, but it now carried more weight than it ever had before. At Kensington Palace, Catherine chose her words carefully as she sat with Charlotte that evening. "Your portrait is back up, darling, at Clarence House." Charlotte looked up, puzzled. Why was it down? Catherine hesitated. "Sometimes grown-ups forget how important something is, but your father reminded them." Charlotte tilted her head, considering. "I want to see it, not to be famous, just to know I'm there." "You are," Catherine whispered. "You always are." That night, Catherine watched her daughter sleep, one arm flung across a book, one leg tangled in the blanket. She was so small, and yet already carrying so much. The frame was back on the wall, but more importantly, her place had been made unshakable, not because the palace gave it to her, but because her parents refused to let anyone take it away. The royal family is built on tradition, on lineage, duty, and silence. But beneath the crowns and choreographed appearances are deeper truths. And for Prince William, one of those truths was this: legacy isn't what history books record. It's what a father remembers, what a son refuses to forget. When Charlotte's portrait was taken down from Clarence House, it wasn't the first time a woman in his family had been quietly removed from view. He had seen this before, first with his mother. As a child, William had wandered palace halls once lined with images of Diana, smiling, vibrant, adored, and then slowly they disappeared. Officially, it was to reflect transition, respect for the crown, moving forward. But to a boy who had just lost his mother, it felt like erasure. She was too iconic, too complicated, too beloved. Her presence threatened the image the palace tried to rebuild. So they dimmed her, one frame at a time. But William never forgot. And as he grew into a man, a husband, a father, he carried Diana's absence with him, not as grief alone, but as fuel. A reminder of what happens when silence goes unchallenged, of what the palace can do when it thinks no one is looking. So when it happened again, this time not to Diana but to his daughter, it struck deeper than anyone around him could have guessed. Charlotte wasn't just another royal child in a gallery of heirs. She was a living link to the very legacy that had once been erased. Her curiosity, her boldness, her resemblance to Diana, it all made her a symbol of continuity, of resilience, of presence. And now she had been removed, not accidentally, not temporarily, but intentionally. To William, it wasn't about one frame, it was about a message. And the message was clear. Some legacies are still too uncomfortable to hang. But this time William would not watch it happen. He moved quickly, but not recklessly. He gathered the facts, confronted Camilla with calm conviction, and gave her a choice: restore Charlotte or he would. And when the portrait returned, larger, prouder, bearing her full title, he made sure it did more than fill a space. It made a statement. In his private study, William placed a copy of the same photo beside one of Diana holding him as a baby. Side by side, two women, one gone too soon, the other just beginning. It was more than decor, it was defiance. Because William had grown into the kind of man his mother had once been denied, the kind who speaks up, who protects without fear, who draws lines where others only whisper. He didn't do it for headlines. He did it so his daughter would grow up knowing her place could not be undone by the quiet discomfort of others. He did it so that when Charlotte walks those palace halls years from now, she'll see her own face still hanging, unchanged, untouched. And she'll understand that she didn't earn her place by obedience, by fitting in, or by being convenient. She belonged because she was loved, because her parents remembered what happens when you don't fight to be seen, because her father had made a vow long ago to a woman the world once tried to forget, never again, and he kept it. Legacy, William had come to understand, isn't about titles or portraits. It's about what survives when power tries to silence memory. And in that moment, quiet, decisive, unshakable, he ensured that Charlotte's memory would never need defending again. Not as long as he was her father. In the world of royalty, control rarely shows its hand directly. It moves subtly through seating charts, public appearances, who gets invited to what, and what hangs on the walls of which palace. It is power dressed in tradition, hidden behind politeness. But sometimes that power overreaches. Sometimes it forgets that people remember what is missing just as clearly as what remains. The removal of Princess Charlotte's portrait from Clarence House might have seemed small to the outside world, a decision of style perhaps, a change of decor. But within the palace, where every detail carries meaning, that act rang louder than any public statement. It was a message, one that said, "You do not belong here, not yet, not like them." But the reply it received was swift and absolute. It came not in press releases or interviews, but in quiet action. In one man's refusal to let his daughter be made invisible. Prince William, raised in the shadows of silence, chose instead to answer with presence. He had been groomed to remain calm, to stay within the lines. But this time the cost of inaction was too personal. He had watched the system erase his mother piece by piece, her photos removed, her name softened in speeches, her memory reshaped to fit a different narrative. That history lived in him. It shaped the kind of man he became. And when he saw the same pattern reappear, targeting a child who had done nothing but exist with grace and spark, it lit a fire in him that protocol could no longer quiet. Charlotte's portrait came back, but not as a simple return. It reappeared more boldly than before, reframed with intention, with dignity, with a plaque that named her not only as a royal daughter, but as part of the future the monarchy is meant to protect, not edit. And this time, her place on that wall could not be quietly rewritten. But William wasn't alone in this act of quiet rebellion. Catherine, steady as ever, played the long game. No confrontation, no outburst. Just presence. A mother's presence. Her decision to display Charlotte's image at home, to write a message on the back of that photo, was her own declaration, one of love, of resistance, of permanence. Together, they sent a clear reminder. This family isn't just a monarchy. It's a memory in motion, and no one, not even a queen, has the right to decide who is seen. Charlotte will likely not remember the week her portrait was taken down. She won't recall the staff whispers, the garden walks, the strategy behind closed doors. But she'll remember something more important. She'll remember that her parents showed up, that when someone tried to erase her, they didn't just fight to restore the frame. They fought to protect her place in the story. And one day when she walks through those palaces, when she sees her image still hanging proudly on the grand staircase, she'll know that her legacy wasn't something she had to earn. It was something her family guarded for her. Because true legacy isn't passed through titles or bloodlines alone. It's passed through love, through defiance in the face of quiet injustice, through people who refuse to let history repeat itself. And in that act, in one portrait, one stance, one refusal to let silence win, William didn't just protect Charlotte. He rewrote the rules. The monarchy may continue to change its faces and figures, but from this moment forward, one thing is certain. Princess Charlotte of Wales will never be forgotten. Not while her father breathes. Not while her mother watches. Not while legacy is guarded by love. Not protocol. In the intricate dance of royal life where everything is measured, every glance, every word, every silence, it's easy to forget that the most powerful movements are the quietest. A portrait went missing. That's how it started. A child's face, once proudly displayed, was quietly taken down. No explanation, no comment, just absence. But sometimes absence speaks louder than presence. That missing frame wasn't just a shift in interior design. It was a message, a soft-spoken dismissal, a moment that said, without saying, "You don't matter here, not enough." And maybe that message would have settled into the wallpaper, unnoticed, like so many before it, had it not been for the people who refused to let it. Because Charlotte didn't stand alone. Her father saw the pattern. He recognized it from long ago. From another time, another woman. A mother who once lit up the palace and was later dimmed, erased not by force, but by the slow, quiet revision of history. William had lived through that once. He wouldn't live through it again. He chose to speak, not through press conferences or tabloids, but through action, through presence, through clarity. He did what Diana never had someone do for her. He drew the line. And Catherine, the constant, graceful guardian of their family's emotional world, stood right beside him. Not with outrage, but with intention. Her response didn't need cameras. It needed a pen and a frame, and the quiet conviction of a mother who knows the value of being seen. Together they took a moment that could have faded into rumor and turned it into something lasting. They told Charlotte and the world, "You belong," and they did it without shouting. That's the lesson here. Legacy isn't loud. It doesn't need gold trim or grand ceremonies. Legacy is the decision to show up, even when no one's watching. It's the hand placed over a removed photograph. It's the quiet return of a frame to a wall, bolder, prouder, more permanent than before. It's the refusal to let history be rewritten again. And for Princess Charlotte, that legacy has now been etched not only in brass, but in action, in memory, in love. She will grow up knowing she is part of something that refused to forget her, not because she wore a crown, but because she mattered. Because she mattered enough for her father to drive across London to a quiet drawing room and stare down a queen. Because she mattered enough for her mother to whisper truth into the silence. And because when someone tried to take her out of the frame, her family stepped into it instead. This wasn't just about Clarence House. This wasn't just about one portrait. This was about who gets to be seen. And more importantly, who makes that decision. If this story moved you, if you believe children deserve to grow up knowing they are loved without conditions, without edits, without strategic omissions, then let this story stay alive. Because in a world that often tells us to stay silent, to play nice, to keep our heads down, there's courage in choosing to protect someone else's place in the world. There's power in saying, "Neil, no, not this time." And there's a legacy in being the person who makes sure the portrait goes back up, not for prestige, not for politics, but for love. So thank you for watching, for caring, for remembering. If you believe that truth matters, that visibility matters, and that legacy is shaped by the ones who dare to defend it, then share this story. Like, comment, subscribe. Not because we need the views, but because Charlotte and every child like her deserves to grow up in a world where they know they belong, where love won't let them be forgotten, where their place isn't conditional, where their story, quietly, defiantly, beautifully, remains, framed, and never removed again.